souhaite la bienvenue à la 14e séance du comité mixte spécial sur la déclaration de situation de crise créée en vertu d'ordre de renvoi de la Chambre des communes et du Sénat. La séance d'aujourd'hui se tient sous format hybride, conformément aux ordres du Sénat et de la Chambre. S'il y avait des difficultés techniques, n'hésitez pas à m'en informer.
To participate fully. We have with us today former Ottawa Police Chief Mr. Peter Slowly. Mr. Slowly, you will have 5 minutes for opening remarks. The floor is yours. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to assist you in your important work reviewing the declaration of the Emergency Act. The Commission of Inquiry, chaired by Justice Rouleau, will begin public hearings next week, and I will be a party to the Commission. I have supported and will continue to support government-related inquiries and initiatives to improve policing and public safety in Canada. At the federal government level, I have previously appeared before the PROC Standing Committee regarding expanding the federal jurisdiction for the security of the parliamentary precinct, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security regarding systemic racism in policing, the Prime Minister's Listening Circle regarding policing reform, and I was also the co-chair for Public Safety Canada's National Expert Committee on Countering Radicalization to Violence. My participation in these federal government consultations, committees, and inquiries is part of my ongoing effort to help build a more safe, just, and inclusive society. In addition to my former role as the Chief of the Ottawa Police Service, I bring to this committee over 3 decades of private and public sector experience in the areas of security, policing, and justice. My experience includes 2 tours of duty in the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Kosovo. I have played lead roles in planning, implementing, and managing a variety of multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional police and security operations. The police leaders, national security leaders, and senior public officials who have appeared before this and other standing committees studying the Freedom Convoy events have stated that this was an unprecedented and unforeseen national security crisis. It was a crisis fueled by social media disinformation and societal polarization, a crisis that introduced new threats and risk factors, a crisis in which actions by police could face stiff and determined resistance, potentially leading to greater unrest and instability, a crisis that exceeded the capacity of the local police in places like Coutts, Windsor, and Ottawa, a crisis that exposed long-standing structural deficits in our public institutions, including police agencies and national security organizations. That said, these events also galvanized the country and demonstrated the ability of our national security organizations, police agencies, public institutions, elected officials, civic leaders, and just plain regular Canadians to resolve a highly volatile national security crisis without any loss of life or serious bodily harm. The events around the Freedom Convoy represented a paradigm shift in terms of scale, planning, logistics, finances, counterintelligence, civil disobedience, etc. What started as an anti-vaccine demonstration rapidly evolved and was co-opted by different ideologically radicalized individuals and insurgency movements. The intended demonstrations in the nation's capital turned into occupations, fortifications, and/or economic disruptions across Canada, the greatest impacts of which affected the City of Ottawa. To be clear, the Ottawa Police Service did its best to deal with this perfect storm that broke first and most on our city. From the onset, we actively sought intelligence, continuously updated operational plans, and constantly tried to secure the needed resources to end the crisis safely and successfully. We deployed all available OPS resources to try to manage the fluid, metastasizing situation, while also trying to provide adequate and effective police services to the rest of the 1 million residents in Canada's largest geographical municipality. We served, suffered, and struggled 24 hours a day for weeks alongside our local residents, business owners, city workers, and public safety partners. We enforced bylaws, provincial statutes, and criminal offences where we could do so safely and without further escalating an already highly volatile situation. We assisted other police agencies, national security organizations, and public officials to better understand and respond to the rapidly evolving and expanding national security crisis. That is why on January 30th, I worked with OPP Commissioner Tom Carrique to convene meetings with police leaders from across the country to share updated threat intelligence information and operational lessons learned. That is why on February 2nd, I stated there may not be a policing solution to this. I made this statement not to advocate local policing responsibilities, but to alert government officials and civil society leaders that an end to the national security crisis may require resources, legislation, and operational capabilities greater than those available to the OPS and other police services of jurisdiction across Canada. That is why on February 7th, I formally requested 1,800 additional officers from across Canada to come to Ottawa. That is why on February 9th, I led the efforts to significantly update our plan, including the expansion of the integrated command structure under the leadership of the OPS. That is why the new integrated capabilities, combined with the efforts of our OPP and RCMP partners, resulted in the cross-Canada recruitment of almost 2,000 officers who were utilized to implement the OPS plan, a plan that leveraged the additional powers of the various emergency declarations and injunctions. This whole-of-country effort ultimately collapsed the local events in Ottawa while accelerating the safe, successful end to the national security crisis. That said, the societal issues and structural deficits that underpinned this unprecedented national security crisis are still largely unresolved. So the threat of another such occurrence happening again remains, and there is an urgent need to learn all that we can from these events. I have been doing and will continue to do everything within my power to share information with the various committees and inquiries, as well as to make recommendations on how to better prevent, mitigate, respond to, and recover from such crises in the future. I conclude by recognizing everyone who is negatively impacted by this national security crisis, especially Ottawa residents, businesses, and city workers. I thank the members of the Ottawa Police Service, as well as those of our policing and national security partners who were professional, ethical, brave, and compassionate in their efforts to help safely and successfully resolve the crisis. Madam Chair, I welcome questions from the committee, and I thank you for inviting me here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sloley. You're right on time. I'll move to Mr. Motz for the first question.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Sloley, thank you so much for your service, both in the military and in policing in this country. Thank you so much. It wasn't clear yet, but you were the chief of police in the Ottawa Police Service for the Freedom Convoy, and which included, and you had that position up until the Emergency Act was invoked until the day after the Emergency Act was invoked on February 15th. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
So in the weeks in advance of the arrival of the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, did convoy organizers seek permissions and direction from Ottawa Police Service and or the City of Ottawa on where and how to park in the downtown core?
Prior to the arrival, there were negotiations and communications between some of the convoy elements. Those communications included efforts from the Ontario Provincial Police and, yes, from the Ottawa Police Service, specifically our police liaison teams.
So in other words, they were seeking permission on where to park, and that permission from the city and from the Ottawa Police Service was provided to them, which included emergency lanes on Wellington and side streets, et cetera. Is that correct?
Permissions is a word that I wouldn't normally use. There were communications and negotiations around how best to reduce the public safety impact of such a large gathering and demonstration in the city, and there were some successful and constructive efforts on both parties, both the police services and the organizers.
Would it be fair to suggest, sir, that throughout the protesters being here, the Freedom Convoy, members of the OPS and the City of Ottawa, from what I understand, had continued dialogue and communication with organizers of that protest?
Dialogue and communication continued from the weeks before all the way through, to my understanding, to my last day in office anyway.
Good. So, which is important, and I'll get to that in a minute. But as the convoy protest continued, obviously, given your background and experience, you and your team developed operational plans to how to best to manage and disperse the protest. Is that correct?
Ultimately, plans were updated on a regular basis, and the ultimate goal was to end safely and successfully the events here in Ottawa.
Okay. So then, you appeared before, and I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Brock, will get into the details of those plans, but you appeared before another parliamentary committee this spring where you said that you had asked the federal government for, and I quote, literally everything that we could think of, end quote, Now, did that include a request from the government to invoke the Emergencies Act?
There were no explicit conversations that I had
Okay.
with the levels of government in regarding the declarations of emergency act at all three levels.
Did anyone else within your Ottawa Police Service ask for the government to invoke the Emergencies Act?
Sorry, one correction, my former answer. We did have conversations with the city of Ottawa around their emergency, but not the other two levels of government. Can you
Okay.
just repeat your question for me, sir?
Did anyone else within your police service ask the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act that you're aware
Not
of?
that I'm aware of, sir.
Now, what support did your police service request from the federal government during the convoy protest? And did the federal government provide you with the resources you requested and in order for you to be maintaining order in Ottawa?
The primary request that I made on a regular basis, continual basis, was resources, particularly more police officers and police-trained personnel. Secondarily, access to tow trucks, predictable access to a large number of officers, 1,800, and access to predictable, sustainable levels of heavy tow trucks.
Asked for that.
Yes, sir.
Did the government, so you asked for that, did the government provide you any indication that that was something that you were going to receive?
We received supports from from both provincial and federal governments right from the beginning. Outreach prior to the arrival, we received OPP officers, RCMP officers, and we had that support throughout. After the official request for 1,800, there was a greater level of integration within our command structure, and we started to see a greater inflow of those resources, particularly over the last 3 to 4 days of my time in office, sir.
Now, was there any shortcomings in what you requested?
I wish I could have got it all within hours, but there are huge logistical challenges to gather officers from across the country that is actually experiencing a national security crisis with locations across the country. I believe our partners did their very best. Our policing partners, particularly the OPP and RCMP, did their very best.
With your knowledge and experience, Mr. Slowly, have you been provided with the resources that you requested in a timely way? And when requested, would you have been able to clear the protesters in downtown Ottawa using the usual, normal, existing legal authorities without the use of the Emergencies Act?
The plan that was in place on February 9th was designed without the declarations of the Provincial or Federal Emergencies Act. That said, components within both of those declarations were incredibly helpful to accelerate and safely end.
You're right.
Mr.
events.
Motz, I'm sorry, your 5 minutes is up. Maybe you can follow
I'll
up.
continue on next. Thanks.
Thank you. Madame Badine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before my time begins, I noticed that earlier and again now Senator Campbell has his hand up. I just want to make sure he can follow the proceedings. Welcome to the committee, Senator. Do you want to check?
Well, you
Yes,
can
I'm
hear
fine.
everything
Thank you very
well?
much. I can. Thank you very much.
And you would be automatically on the list, Senator Campbell, so I'll call
Thank
you
you.
when the time comes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Slawley. I join my colleague in thanking you for your service to our country as well. I have a particular a personal experience during the convoy. As I mentioned in a previous meeting, I walked to Parliament every day during the illegal blockade. And on several occasions, I was able to speak with police officers on the ground in plain clothes, just asking questions as a resident of Ottawa temporarily when I'm on the Hill. And several officers told me that when asked, I asked them why it is they weren't ticketing trucks that were blocking roads or enforcing, for example, the highway safety code. And I was being told again and again by officers that they had orders from higher up not to enforce the law, not to intervene. I wonder, sir, if you gave those orders or if you know who did.
Appreciate the conversations you had. Obviously, I wasn't there to verify them, but I'll take your explanation on face value. There were clearly orders sent through for us to enforce the laws that we could. There were also very clear understanding that, and this is borne out in multiple intelligence reports from multiple levels of security operations, including ITAC reports that stated that enforcement activity in any theater across the country could have escalating impacts. In fact, I quoted earlier from that in my presentation. The reality on the ground was that officers had maximum discretion about whether and how they would engage in enforcement activities, whether by law enforcement, provincial statutes, or criminal code. We made enforcement efforts on every single day, and there were statutes that were enforced at all three levels. But the officers had the discretion, if they felt it wasn't safe, they didn't have a proper resource, or it could escalate the situation, to make that decision. And that's fundamental to democratic policing in any state of affairs, whether an emergency or not.
But the OPS provided a press release on January 30th in which it stated that police have avoided ticketing and towing so as not to instigate confrontations with demonstrators. It continues, and I'll continue to quote, still confrontations and the need for de-escalation has regularly been required. That comes from the OPS, sir. And on January 27th, you referred to situation reports. The RCMP situation report on page 3 of 281 of the document disclosure indicates that they were expecting a range from 1,500 to 2,500 trucks. And so laws were being broken by the drivers of these vehicles. But if I understand correctly from your testimony, due to safety concerns, they were not always being enforced, among others, the Highway Safety Code. You have also been quoted in the media saying that you were trying to avoid bloodshed, and that is a direct quote. And so were you afraid or were there concerns that you had that made it such that officers were reluctant to enforce the Highway Safety Code because of the demonstrators or concerns surrounding what the demonstrators may do?
But there were careful threat assessments that were provided through briefings to the officers to make sure that they had maximum discretion to make very, very important decisions on a day-by-day, interaction-by-interaction basis.
But the OPS officers did seek to enforce the law, at least on one occasion, and make an arrest, but apparently were unable to do so because they were surrounded by aggressive protesters. Do you recall that incident?
There were many such incidents like that.
And I guess with the short amount of time I have remaining, sir, I would ask, in a general sense, when members of Parliament, including the leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre, were out on the streets on February 4th handing out donuts, right in the middle of what you were experiencing as a very difficult and intense situation, how did that impact the morale of your officers?
There were incredible ranges of actions by individuals across civil society that were problematic for what we were trying to accomplish, but there were far greater amounts of efforts to safely and ultimately successfully resolve this national security crisis.
And do you believe that were it not for the intervention of the federal government, you would have been able to resolve the situation?
I was no longer in office when the situation was ultimately resolved. The plan that we put in place up to my last day in office considered whether or not we'd be able to have the resources to apply to private injunctions and the various declarations. Ultimately, the elements of the three levels of declaration of emergency were very much assisting a faster and more safe resolution of the circumstances here and across the country.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Mr. Fortin?
Merci,
5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Slowly, good day. Mr. Slowly, I'm simply trying to understand the sequence here. From what I gather, you did not ask for the trucks to be towed. Can you hear the interpreter? Those trucks sort of settled in over time, end of January, early February, right here downtown Ottawa. Why were they not removed as soon as they stopped or tried to sort of settle there?
Thank you very much for the question. So the red zone areas where the along Wellington over into Rideau and down through the Parkway just west of us here were literally filled within minutes. Efforts were made to hold negotiations that were in place to allow for emergency lanes of traffic and to provide for a period of demonstration that would then end. Clearly did not transpire throughout the course of that day through the weekend. Those red zones were essentially filled within the morning hours of Saturday. There was no further movement into those red zones, but there was egress from them when we could negotiate that or when people chose to leave.
Mais pour quelle raison?
But why did you not remove those trucks from the start?
Thank you, sir. The speed around which the main convoys that settled in the red zone area was such that we were not able to move in with heavy tow trucks and sufficient personnel. The reactions and actions coordinated at a very high level by those early arriving elements of the convoys were such that the level of escalations that I referred to earlier increased the risk to public safety, which includes officer safety.
Oui, mais là, quand même.
Yes, but here you have trucks parking on Wellington Street right in front of Parliament. I'm not a police officer. Perhaps I'm wrong and you can correct me. If so, I'm maybe naive, but I feel as though you could have called some tow trucks and asked them to clear Wellington Street straight away. From what I gathered, you had a hard time mobilizing these tow trucks that were hesitating or did not want to get involved. You may confirm that or not. If so, did you take procedures for that to happen, to force them to tow those trucks?
Yes, sir. The issue was not access to tow trucks in the first few hours. While we didn't have a fleet of them, we had access to, I think, between 3 to 5 heavy tow trucks that could have been staged and moved around the downtown core. The issue was not whether or not there was a bylaw offense taking place. The issue was public safety risks associated with trying to remove large trucks in large numbers with large numbers of demonstrators and residents, business owners, and other people in the downtown core. It was the public safety risk associated to that type of intervention enforcement action that did not allow us to start to come in and tag and tow trucks. That said, the vehicles that were in those red zones were continually identified, owners were identified, and it is my understanding, although I didn't see the charges laid after I left office, that charges were identified and laid against the operators and owners accordingly for bylaw offenses, provincial act offenses, and there are a large number of criminal code offenses that I believe are still either under investigation or before the courts.
Mais,
But yes, I understand there are security issues, and you're right to mention this. They are major. But in your view, the idea of leaving these trucks in that perimeter, in that red zone on Wellington, is that in and of itself not a greater security issue? There couldn't have been a fire truck or an ambulance in case of another type of emergency, someone wounded or something like that. There were a whole host of other issues, and perhaps I'm mistaken here, but I feel as though that increased security problems, which wouldn't have existed had those trucks been cleared. Would you not agree?
There certainly was a very complicated security risk assessment being done literally on a daily basis. It was not until we were able to secure the ultimately 2,000 extra police officers that a level of scale on the policing side could match the scale and capabilities on the people, particularly in the red zone, but not exclusively. The issue, again, was the level of public safety risk, the resources and capabilities that we could bring to bear on removing that risk versus trying to do it in an under-resourced, under-prepared way, which could have, we ultimately believed, increased the likelihood of public safety risks, including serious bodily harm, loss of life.
Mr. Fortin, your time is up. Second round. Mr. Green.
merci.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the committee, Mr. Slowly. You know, I think this is a good opportunity for this committee to help perhaps clear the air on some inconsistencies that we've seen both in the public discourse around this and the lead up to your departure, to what, you know, I would personally view as a breakdown in policing as it relates to the occupation and the events that ultimately led to the invocation of this act. In his testimony before this committee, Minister Bill Blair, I put a question to him about your statement that there may not be a police solution to the demonstration and that the institutions and police services were unprepared for the convoy. In his response, Minister Bill Blair said, "I accept Chief Slawley's assessment that he was unprepared for what took place in Ottawa." I want to give you a chance to respond to that. Were you unprepared for what happened in Ottawa, or was the Ottawa Police Service unprepared for what happened here?
Well, unfortunately, the context in which I made my statement was clearly misunderstood. Let me be clear, and I said it again today. institutions, public institutions across this country were unprepared for what happened during those weeks. That included police services and national security organizations. And yes, that includes the Ottawa Police Service. But there were structural deficits across multiple institutional lines.
And within the OPS, sir, you know, there had been reporting, at least through the RCMP, about internal documents that were worried about the threat of Mounties sympathetic to leaking information to convoy protesters. There were certainly, there was firsthand accounts and live streams of the relationship that seemed to form between some officers in a very cooperative way and the occupation. You know, in the lead up to it, and in fact on your resignation on the 15th of February, you stated that you were confident that the Ottawa Police Service was better positioned to end the occupation. So what changed materially from when you took on the pre-planning for this and when you resigned? Did the morale or did the actions or inactions of your officers have anything to do with it?
Singularly, the difference in my statement that we were better prepared. We had a significantly upgraded plan from almost a week before. That plan called for a massive incursion of resources. I had identified 1,800. Ultimately, there were 2,000.
So if you were prepared and you had a plan, why resign?
If you're asking the reason for my resignation,
Correct.
sir, thank you. There are a number of reasons that go into any person's decision to resign, particularly from a high-profile public office. Many of them are extremely personal to me and my family, but the number one reason was for public safety. The reason for public safety was that there was increasing levels of doubt about the capabilities of the Ottawa Police Service, lowering levels of public trust in the midst of an unfolding local and national security crisis. And when trust starts to leave policing, that increases public safety risks. As the head of the organization, I had accountability for the organization. And I made a decision, ultimately, I made a decision for public safety to remove myself from the equation.
Do you feel that perhaps you took too much of a center stage? I mean, obviously, in policing, in the position that you're in, you would have deputies who would be operational. Which deputies would have been operational to the implementation and planning processes?
The operational deputy was Acting Deputy Chief Trish Ferguson.
And the interim Chief Bell, what role would Chief Bell have
He
played?
was assigned intelligence operations.
Okay. Because from my standpoint, you know, and from many other people from the outside looking in, you know, it looked like perhaps there may have been a scenario where you didn't have complete command and control over frontline officers. Is that a fair or unfair assessment?
Our frontline officers did an amazing job in almost unhuman circumstances, minus 35-degree temperatures for weeks on end. Our frontline members, civilian and sworn, did a great job as much as they possibly could in those circumstances and throughout my tenure as chief of police.
Sir, the plan didn't work, right? Like they doubled down on the occupation with coordination with the city. They occupied a staging area at Coventry. They were bringing in diesel. We know through past threat assessments that, you know, having design threats are a major issue coming out of the Toronto 18, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and our former member Vern White had referenced in previous testimony. So the plan actually didn't work leading up to that, and yet upon your resignation, it was your assertion that they were better prepared to take on the threat.
The plan worked, sir. There was a safe and successful end to the occupation and the national security crisis. It was based on the plan that was updated and continuously evolved through every day in office. My statement in my last day in office affirmed that we had a plan, we were now receiving significant new levels of resources, and that we could foresee an end, a safe, successful, lawful end to the events here and nationally. And that is what happened within the week.
Mr. Green, your
Thank
time
you.
is up. Mr. Green, can I ask you to time? I'm up next.
Happy to do that. Senator Boniface, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Solo, thank you for your service, both domestically and internationally. I want to step back a bit to the early days. I believe that you said or made reference to some negotiations that took place with the protesters. I'm somewhat familiar with how that would take place as they came certainly across the country and then into the city of Ottawa. Would you conclude, at least with those early days and those early discussions, that you felt you had an agreement with them on how they would conduct themselves within the duration of what you expected the protest to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Boniface. And again, your own experience will play this out. In many occasions, there is a singular organizing body or a significant influencer within a protest group. This was not the case. There were significant efforts by multiple jurisdictions and multiple agencies at all three levels of policing to seek negotiated agreements, reasonable understandings and commitments, but there was never a unified other for any police agency with which to come to any substantive understanding as to whether what was agreed to would actually happen on the day of. And in fact, on the day of, we were joined by thousands of other individuals, groups, who we had never had a chance to communicate with, never mind negotiate with, and therefore at no time during my period in office up until February 15th could I ever say to you or this body that we had an understanding with the protesters, the occupiers, the convoy leaders.
Okay, thank you very much. In your professional opinion, can you tell me at what point you think the protests went from a lawful demonstration to an illegal occupation?
The very second that any law was broken, whether it be a bylaw, a provincial offences statute, or a criminal code offence, whether or not anybody that had stated their intent to come to Ottawa and protest had failed to secure a permit, at that point it was unlawful. But again, as you know, there are many unlawful demonstrations that the police will provide supports to in order to facilitate to the greatest degree the intent of what I believe is our Charter of Rights. And we'll manage through those unlawful elements, even when there are elements that are violent, in order to facilitate as best as possible.
Thank you very much. If I can just clarify, because I want to make sure that I've got it correctly, you would have experience in other incidents where it would often be that you would actually have a point person to deal with, and probably, given that you worked in the City of Toronto, went through a number of those where those would be just regular occurrences. You'd work with a point person. And so just to be clear, what you're saying here was it was very difficult to identify who those point people were.
I would say it was impossible.
And at some protests, certainly many protests, they would actually have people earmarked for security to make sure that the protest was held lawfully. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would it be clear also to say that likely in this case, there was not that sort of structure in place?
There were elements of it, but nothing that you could in any way suggest was going to work across the theater that we had here in Ottawa. And again, this was not just a local event. No. It was a local event that coordinated other events across the country. So whatever we might negotiate here might have no bearing elsewhere and vice versa.
Okay, and can you describe to me how the incident command system was working during your time in terms of unify? Because I think a lot of the public doesn't understand how policing works in that regard.
Thank you, and I may not have time to fully answer that question within this, but the incident command system is relatively standard across the country at this stage. Thanks in large part to previous Ottawa Police Service executive members, including Sue O'Sullivan. She started the intersect component of our incident command system some 15 to 17 years ago, which brings the major National Capital Region police agencies and other stakeholders, including the City of Ottawa, NCR personnel, into joint planning, information sharing, in many cases intelligence sharing. There is significant line of sight to operational plans, contingencies, and resource contributions from across that group of intersect partners, all of which started up well before the convoys arrived and continued to my last day in office. It is my understanding it continues to this day.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll leave mine there because I only have, I think, about 10 seconds left. So, Mr. Green, if you can, I'll take it back. Thank you. And so we'll move to Senator Carignan.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Slowly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Slowly. On the OPS site on February 12th, there was indication that there was a plan to free up or clear Wellington Street. Had your organization come up with this plan? Had it drafted this plan?
Yes, and the plan was not just for Wellington Street. It was for the entire set of events happening within the city.
Okay, parfait. Donc,
okay. we received some notes that are not redacted. I mean, some that are not redacted. And there was a group, a committee, that included the Prime Minister and some cabinet members that received reports on events. On February 12th, the Public Safety Minister stated during one of these meetings with the Prime Minister that
The RCMP reported having a meeting with the OPS chief and OPP commissioner. There are approximately 350 protesters on the Parliament Hill and 400 on Wellington Street. No, sorry, I missed the quote. So that appears the Minister of Security of Public Safety indicated there appears to be a lack of plan in Ottawa, with the chief of OPS having yet to approve the plan developed with the RCMP and OPP. During the discussion, confirmation was obtained that the OPS chief of police accepted the plan and the commissioner of the RCMP agreed to be able to provide additional details of the plan at next call. Donc, ça suggère que
So this suggests that you had no plan, that it was the RCMP's plan and the OPP's plan that they actually presented to you that you would have, in theory, agreed to. I was surprised by this because that Prime Minister's committee was on February 12th, and you'd already said something on the internet site stating that you did have a plan. So was it your plan, or was it the RCMP's plan to free up the sector, or was it a combination of both?
If I understand the question, sir, the Ottawa Police Service is the police's jurisdiction for the City of Ottawa. We had a continuous operational lead of the incident command system, and I was continuously, up until my last day in office, accountable for all police operations in this city. That included the operational plans for the events that related to the city. At no time did I cede control of that or lose accountability of it. What we did from the beginning, as I said to Senator Boniface, is make sure that our partners were as integrated as possible, and Intersect is one of, if not the best examples of multi-agency coordination. At no point on February 12th, February 11th, February 13th, were we not in control of that plan, not leading that plan. At no point did we not have the support of our partners, including the RCMP and the OPP. So they were very much involved in all the planning phases from before and during. I can't speak about after. And it was the Ottawa Police Service plan that was in existence on February 12th, on my last day in office on February 15th, and was used to ultimately safely and successfully end events here and across, well, end events here and contribute to ending the events across the country.
Donc,
So the RCMP and the OPP were quite involved in the plan, were in agreement with it, and had every reason to believe that the plan was going to work without the requirement for an Emergencies Act, which at that point you didn't know would be eventually passed.
Just to be clear, I can't and won't speak for the members of the OPP and the RCMP.
but for you.
As far as I was concerned as the chief of police, the briefings I received from my incident command team, which included senior leaders from the OPP and the RCMP, we had a significant plan in place with a significant greater level of integration and resources that would be acquired. Hence my statement at the end of my last day in office, that we were in a significantly better place in order to successfully end the events in Ottawa.
Okay. Quelle a été votre réaction?
What was your reaction when you saw the Ambassador Bridge cleared or freed up on the weekend of February 13th? Did you say to yourself, well, we'll be able to do the same thing here in Ottawa?
Not at all, sir. The events in Windsor and around the Ambassador Bridge were entirely different, related, but entirely different in terms of scale. The challenges, some of them were similar, others were very, very different. Like here in Ottawa, Chief Mizuno in Windsor required significant external resources to come in and a significant level of integration beyond what she would normally have to deal with as chief of police in that jurisdiction. It took many attempts to end that situation there, but I'm glad it ended safely and successfully, as we saw here in Ottawa. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Solly. Senator Carignan, your time was up. Senator Harder.
Thanks very much, Chair, and Mr. Slowly, thank you for being here. And I would join my colleagues in thanking you for your public service over the many years now. I'd like to start with where you left off in conversation with Mr. Motz, where he asked you about the declarations, and you said both the Ontario and federal government's declarations were, quote, incredibly helpful. Could you give us a little more color as to how the national invocation was helpful?
Yes, sir, I'll do my best. Please understand, I remained in office some 24 hours after the federal one was invoked, and the provincial one was just 72 hours before that. Primarily, for me, it provided a massive lift in resources. The facilitation, particularly of swearing in of special constable status across the country to allow the airlift of officers arriving from literally every province into the city was massively important. The provisions that allowed us to get greater access, predictable and sustainable access to tow trucks and other related resources. There are other provisions that I was less aware of at the time of in office, but subsequently through reading and research, I could see how it would be incredibly effective. Never in my working life have I seen the extent of such measures, but singularly removing from the immediate theater of the downtown core anybody in the process of protesting or traveling to the protest would have alleviated a wide range of public safety and officer safety risks, while the officers focused primarily on removing the vehicles and the persons in the red zone. You never want to be caught between multiple angles of potential hostile threat actors. And again, without being in command of the Ottawa Police Service and being on the ground, watching as a private citizen, not an officer not having to watch over their back and can focus on the primary threats in front of them is an incredibly important aspect of public safety and officer safety.
Thanks very much. I as you know, live in Ottawa and observed this all very personally and close at hand. A number of Ottawa citizens were quite perplexed, I dare say, with the attempted agreement by Mayor Watson with Tamara Lish with respect to removing some of the convoy and putting them on Wellington Avenue. Were you consulted before these conversations took place between the mayor and Ms. Tisch?
I was aware that there were negotiations going on between the mayor and third parties. I was not, and no member of my police service, to my knowledge, was involved in any of the direct negotiations.
Did this make your job more difficult?
There were several efforts that I'm aware of at all three levels of government in different parts of the country to engage in interlocutor conversations, negotiations. Some were more than successful, some less so.
Would you have supported the removal of large vehicles from the downtown area and the placement of those vehicles on Wellington?
I would not have supported any additional vehicles going into the red zone areas, but I would have supported vehicles leaving any portion of the downtown area.
I think we all would.
Participating in the events surrounding the convoys. Yes, sir.
If I have a few seconds left, I'd like to get back to your now twice repeated description of structural deficits. Could you elaborate beyond the policing one, what you've referred to, what you mean by those structural deficits that we must address if we are to be better protected against future events?
I appreciate your ask for me to go beyond the policing ones, but that is my realm of expertise. What I will say is that they range from underinvestment or misinvestment financially and otherwise in the capabilities of our police services across this country. Our police services are one of the fundamental elements of our national security structure. From my experience in private sector, my relationships with national security directors, deputy directors, and senior officials, senior analysts within national security organizations, we have not fundamentally invested, not necessarily dollars and cents, but invested in our national security policing capabilities. This goes back well before even my time as a police officer, but certainly we have not kept up with the times. those structural deficits have been exposed in other events that we've experienced over the last several decades, but they were fully exposed, I think really exposed, in the events that took place over those several weeks in January and February.
Thank you.
Your time is up. We'll now move to Senator Campbell. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Chief, for being here today. As a former officer and mayor of Vancouver, I have some idea of the difficulties that you encountered. And so my question is on a different tack. Can you speak to your relationship with the Ottawa Police Services Board and having to report to them?
I'm not sure what the question is, sir. We had a reporting relationship. They're our oversight body, and that happened on a continual basis throughout my time in office and on a daily basis throughout the course of the events that took place here in Ottawa.
Did they have any say in the operational side of it?
No, nor would they have so under the jurisdiction of the Police Services Act.
Okay, so in fact, the police board is oversight, but is not operational in any way, shape, or form.
They cannot direct operations. They can certainly ask questions and request information that relate to operations. Yes, sir.
Did they play any role in your decision making during the weeks that this was ongoing?
As an oversight body, yes, they would inform and influence what we were doing, but up to the limits allowed by the Police Services Act, not beyond that.
Could you give me an example?
Well, we'd have daily communications, emergency board meetings. There would be questions asked in the public session and in the confidential session. There would be questions around adequate and effective policing, which is within the jurisdiction of the Police Service Board to ask. One specific question on February 5th at an emergency board meeting asked by then Chair Deans of me is, given the totality of the circumstances that you're facing, I'm paraphrasing, do you have the ability to provide adequate and effective policing in the City of Ottawa? So those, I think, are legitimate questions in legitimate forums around which they can express their concerns, express their priorities, but not cross the line into directing around operations.
Okay. I'd like to move to the mayor and his negotiations with Ms. Litch. What was your thoughts on that? I mean, you're the person in charge of what's going on there, and yet you say you had no information, no ongoing information of any of this. What are your thoughts on that from a committee?
Yep. Sorry, I'm just going to remove this headphone. Just to be clear, I took no part, none of my officers, to my knowledge, took any part of the actual negotiations. I understood in principle that there were negotiations to remove vehicles from the red zone area, from the downtown core area, particularly in the residential areas, to other areas of the city or outside of the city. In principle, I was supportive of that general aspect of negotiation. My simple statement back to the city manager who informed me of this was that if it contravened our operational planning, that I would not allow for that to happen.
Okay, it just seems counterintuitive to me that you're leaving on the street and somebody's cutting deals behind your back and you aren't part of them. It just does not seem to be conducive to moving forward. My last question, if I have time, with 2020 hindsight, everything's perfect. So what major changes do you think should be made now that you've seen everything that's gone on? What would the major changes be that you would bring about to ensure that this did not happen again? And if it did, it was dealt with in a different way?
Yes, sir. I've actually given quite a bit of thought to that, and I appreciate your question. I actually have a 2-page document with 11 points with a lot of detail associated to it. I'm not sure if I would have the time to go through that. I'll look to the chair for her guidance, but it is something that I'd be happy to provide later on.
Perhaps
you
if
can
you could
table it
provide
with us. That would certainly be suffice.
I'm not sure what the term tables mean, but
Or just share a copy with us.
Yeah.
okay. It is not a completed document, just to be clear. It is still very much a draft document, but I will provide what I have in draft for the committee to consider.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Just to answer your question, Mr. Soule, I think the committee would be happy to see the draft, but if you think the a completed copy would better serve the committee, I think we'd be open to that as well.
I'd prefer to complete it and then submit that as a completed
I'm
document.
seeing agreement around the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wish you luck, Chief.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, we're moved to second round. Mr. Brock? 4
Thank you.
minutes, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Mr. Slowly. I too want to thank you for your decades of policing domestically and your tours of service internationally. I understand as well that a operational plan in terms of the ultimate conclusion to this protest, it's not something new to you. In fact, you've been involved in operational plans, again, for decades in other protests outside of Ottawa. Fair to say? Yes. And you had your service, as well as the City of Ottawa, had weeks to prepare and discuss a strategy with the organizers of the protest as to where the staging would take place. And to that end, and quite frankly, I appreciate your frankness in answering that affirmatively when the question was posed to you by my colleague, Mr. Motz, unlike Acting Chief Bell, who had some difficulty getting to the truth of that when he testified on May 17th, 2022. Leaving that aside, during the protest, I was able to go on the OPS website and I found a 7-page document that indicated in very bright letters, Ottawa Police, Ottawa Truck Convoy. It lists details as to protesters traveling eastbound on Highway 417, 416, eastbound on Highway 417. There was descriptions about tractors with no trailers, tractors with open and empty trailers, trucks with box trailers. There was conversation and details about staging areas. Very brightly worded a document, and it set out very, very clearly as to where these protesters were to set up shop and where their supplies ultimately would be. And in fact, there was a very detailed description as to how many tractor trailers could actually park on Wellington Street. You'd agree with me? This document does exist? Now, one of the areas that I want to confirm with you is the government has not shared that detail with Parliament, certainly has not shared that detail with Canadians, because there is a sense that was out there that this was something that was controlled by the organizers, that they took those steps without consultation with your service and the City of Ottawa to park. That's not true, correct?
I'm sorry, I may have missed a question in there. Sorry, sir.
The question is the narrative from the Prime Minister that was not shared with the government, that there was an actual plan, an authorization. You didn't want to use the word permission, but an authorization to park their vehicles in specific locations in the parliamentary precinct.
I won't presume to speak for any other organization, including the Office of the Prime Minister, but as a standard practice, police liaison teams will negotiate with any demonstrator coming into this city for any reason to try to align that as much as possible to good public safety outcomes using best practices.
Thank you. Mr. Slowly, the Prime Minister described the protesters as, quote, a fringe minority who held, quote, unacceptable views. They were racist. They were misogynists. That divisive rhetoric was shared numerous times in the House, in the press, shared by members of the government. What impact did incendiary rhetoric like this have on your ability to enforce the law during the convoy protests?
Can you briefly answer that, Mr. Slowly? Very briefly.
We were focused on providing a safe outcome for what turned out to be an unprecedented paradigm-shifting event. There were so many impacts that happened, good and bad. I couldn't begin to list them for you, sir. I apologize.
Mr. Rani, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Slowly, and I'll repeat what everyone has said about your public service. Thank you for it, and thank you for appearing today. I'm going to go a little bit fast. In response to, I think, Senator Harder, you had said that removing the ability of people who are coming downtown to protest helped because it helped with the removal eventually of the trucks, because police officers effectively weren't looking over their shoulders. There's only the task at hand, and there weren't more people coming in. The Emergencies Act declaration specifically said, one of the regulations there too, that it was prohibited to come for a public assembly that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace, other than lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent. You agree with that? That's the terms of the declaration.
I haven't read the declaration in any detail. I take you at your word that you're reading from the document.
So the people that were coming downtown were coming for an unlawful purpose. Those are the people that would have been prevented pursuant to what I just read.
Again, I don't have an independent recollection of the document, so I'll take you at your word.
Okay, and when you're trying to remove the tow trucks, there were children that were observed in and around the blockade that was on Wellington and elsewhere. Is that correct?
Intelligence came to me in the middle of this that there were vulnerable people living in and around the red zone areas and other parts of the theater. That significantly increased the risk factors that we were dealing with.
So going in and removing the trucks was impeded by the fact that there was minor children that you didn't want to endanger.
And a large range of other high-risk factors. For me, that was one of the top high-risk factors,
Okay.
yes, sir.
So efforts that were made, or that might have been made and were eventually made to remove minors from the situation, that would have facilitated safe policing and the safe removal of the trucks.
That was mission critical for me. I suspect it was even after I left office.
Okay, and that's actually entrenched in the documentation. I'm reading from another regulation that was passed. This is SOR 2022-21, which says at 4 sub 2, a person must not cause a person under the age of 18 years to travel to or within 500 meters of an area where an assembly referred to as an unlawful assembly is taking place. So that kind of language, if enforced, actually facilitates your policing and the safe removal of the
Removing vulnerable persons out of a theater like that was a critically important aspect.
And can you tell me a bit about, we heard a lot about media reports about efforts where tow trucks were attempted to be utilized, and the trucking companies themselves admitted to receiving threats and feeling scared to assist the auto police services with removing some of these blockading vehicles. Can you explain, did that occur, and do you have any understanding of that?
That was intelligence provided to me throughout the course of what took place here in the city of Ottawa. Intelligence provided to me from other locations, including Coutts, Alberta, through Commissioner Lucky.
Okay. And the Emergencies Act declaration talked about, I mentioned about the minors. It also talked about the ability to effectively commandeer the usage of tow trucks, including the large trucks, which then eventually facilitate the removal of the vehicles.
There were
That's
specific
correct?
references around accessing towing resources. Again, I don't have the exact language, and commandeering isn't something that I can state explicitly was in there, but by default, the ability of police to predictably obtain sufficient tow resources, yes.
Okay, and you talked about the need for police resources, and you mentioned the 1,800 figure and eventually landed at 2,000. But tell me about, from my understanding through these committee hearings that we've been having, it's one thing to have the police on the ground, so you wanted police on the ground, but it's another thing once they're on the ground, like in Ottawa, to have them actually sworn in and able to execute their functions. And the swearing in process under normal circumstances can take some time, is that correct?
It can take time. It always does.
Yeah.
There are practices that are in place, particularly here in Ottawa, for multi-jurisdictional events. But anything that speeds up the time for an officer to be fully deployable within the theater under the Ottawa Police Service Incident Command reduce public safety. Time and resources were critical.
And did the Emergencies Act declaration, which provided for the massive swearing in of police officers multiples at a time, did that speed things up?
Again, during my time remaining in office after that, I can't give you a firsthand explanation. From a logic model, yes, it would have, but you'd have to put that question to Interim Chief Bell and the incident commanders at that time after I left.
Thank you.
Mr. Ronnie, your time is up. Mr. Fortin, 3 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Slawley, during the first round, I was asking you questions about the tow trucks. I gather that you were telling me that at the start, it wasn't urgent to have them towed, and then at some point there were just too many to tow. Is that correct?
No, sir. It was always urgent to try to make sure that we could maintain emergency lanes that were negotiated, but the volume and capabilities and the circumstances that we found very early in the morning on Saturday precluded that until we had the sufficient scale of resources that we were just talking about.
Est-ce que vous avez
Did you ask tow trucks to come and tow these trucks? At some point, did you call them and say, I need these trucks towed?
The operational plan included the securing of heavy tow trucks and other tow trucks to support our traffic operations. They were available. It was the ability to deploy that particular technique in the theater that quickly developed that did not allow us to do it, particularly in the red zone. We did tag and tow trucks, including large trucks, throughout the days and weeks that followed, just not in the embedded red zone areas.
Mais
But why? Why didn't you require, demand that these tow trucks remove the trucks from the red zone? You did say that there were children in this zone, that was a security concern. But you could have, I feel you could have called social services to get the kids. None of that was attempted, if I gather correctly. You were waiting for those 1,800 police officers?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and so it's hard to follow the track of all these multiple events. As soon as we became aware of vulnerable children and other vulnerable persons within the red zone areas and across the theater, yes, we were in contact with and in coordination with on a daily basis with the appropriate agencies, including Children's Aid Services. We also provided them as much information we could around the threats in those areas and sought their advice. But ultimately, it was too great a risk to go in and tow a truck with the hundreds of trucks, the thousands of protesters, and the capabilities we're seeing locally and across the country. And so we had to balance a scale of risks against a potential scale of rewards. And not until we could get the level of resources and the supports from the other parts of civil society were we able to do that safely and successfully.
vous avez
From what I gather, on February 9th, you asked for 1,800 police officers, correct? That was on February 9th?
Sir.
le 7 février.
The 7th, okay. And when did these police officers arrive in Ottawa? That 1,800 or 2,000 actually at the end of the day. When did that happen?
Again, just to be clear, from even before the arrival of the main convoys here in the city, we were receiving additional resources. Those resources ebbed and flowed depending on pressures across the country and the province. After February 7th request, we then met with our main partners, the OPP and the RCMP, increased the integration of those operations, particularly around planning and logistics. It was at that time, between the 9th and, say, the 11th and 12th, when that integration level kicked in, that we started to see a greater inflow of resources from across the province and the country.
Okay.
It's up. Mr. Green, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. In my first round of questions, perhaps I danced around what I wanted to get to the heart of the matter of, looking at this event and how they took place, looking across the country. You seem to be the only person in senior leadership who took accountability for what happened across the country. So I'm going to put some very direct questions to you. And I'm going to reference a letter from the police union president, Matt Scoff, on September 10th, 2020, who stated that you lost the room, that you inflamed the workplace. Did you at any time during the occupation, lead up to the occupation, have a challenge in the morale of your officers to raise to the size and scale and scope of the crisis due to perhaps some of the interpersonal HR issues that you might have been facing with the police?
Thank you, sir. I don't know any police chief in this country or anywhere else in North America, quite frankly, in the Five Eyes countries, that doesn't have a morale challenge with their police officers that has been increasing year over year, decade over decade. That is not unique to the city of Ottawa.
With specificity, can you keep this on, please? With specificity, the challenge that I have is that you stay the course. On the 15th, you resign, and on the 18th, it's done, right? So you stay on until after it's called, but then you resign within 24 hours. Did you at any point in time receive political pressure from your board or from the association or any other external factors politically? If we were to FOI emails, would we see from the mayor or from the police chair pressure on you to step down, to be the scapegoat, to perhaps pave the way for a fresh start for somebody else?
There are many people who have many theories around why I resigned. I've stated very publicly here, I resigned primarily for public safety reasons. There was declining trust in my organization, but implicitly declining trust in me I took myself out of the equation once we had put in place the integrated operational plan to bring those resources to bear to safely and successfully end this. But, sir, I will
Where do
tell
you think
it
the
was
loss
a
of
highly
trust came?
politicized element.
There was a highly politicized element. Could you expand on
in
that?
every major event that I've ever been involved in, locally, provincially, nationally, or internationally, these events draw high political pressure.
Did you receive
from all
pressure
levels.
from the board to step down?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive pressure from the police association to step down?
In this event, no, sir.
In previous events?
Yes, sir.
How would you reference your relationship with the police association?
Now I'm a private citizen.
Sure, before, while you were chief.
Highly contentious for the most part, but there were times we were able to cooperate and find mutual outcomes that supported our membership and the city as well.
When they say that you lost the room, during the course of the command and control during the occupation, did you have the room or had you lost the room?
The reference to losing the room was after I had presented before the National Committee on Public Safety and National Security on the issue of systemic racism in policing. And I stated emphatically, I believe I was the first chief in Canada to say that systemic racism was part of policing, in fact, part of every institution.
And they
It
held
was
that
in-
against you.
It was in that context and the fallout after that that we had a very contentious period with the board and internally. As most organizations grapple with the issue of systemic racism, that's just a matter of course for
Last
any
question.
CEO.
Next round.
So
Senator Carignan, 3 minutes.
Ben, je vais continuer sur la même.
I'll follow along in the same tack. I'm having a hard time understanding why you resigned. I feel as though you're at the Stanley Cup finals here. You're the coach. You're almost there. You're just about to win. You've got the new police officers. Other resources. You have this Emergency Measures Act that is based on what I'm hearing that is not essential, but gave you additional tools. And then you decide to leave. The plan that you had, you trusted in before February 14th. What was missing there? I mean, I understand this issue of trust that you mentioned, but really, in the locker room here, in the organization, at the head of it, what happened for you to leave, for them to ask you to leave?
Well, again, you've referenced the two primary issues, sir. Declining public trust creates a public safety risk in any policing organization, any policing environment. The focus of that was increasingly on the Ottawa Police Service for a national security crisis and increasingly on the officer that held that position, Chief of Police. That was myself. My interpretation, others will have their own opinions, was that declining level of trust in my officers and in my office was potentially slowing down resources and supports necessary for our officers to be able to safely, successfully end this. I took myself out of the equation because I wasn't going to take 1,400 people out of the equation. And that was my last act in office, quite frankly, to speed up in whatever way I possibly could. At that time, after many days working in a row and many sleepless nights, to find another way to speed up the resources, which was the number one thing that we needed in the Ottawa Police Service in this city, to come into this city. I don't know if it had the effect that I desired, but that was my intent. The primary intent was for public safety, to get those officers into the city, to clear the streets, to get us back to a state of normalcy.
Donc,
From what I gather, then, you felt as though the government or the other sources didn't have trust in you, and that was delaying the resources and other police officers coming to Ottawa.
I want to be clear, I'm not making any direct line of causation. There were a massive range of public statements from a massive range of civil society actors from all parts of this country that pointed fingers of blame and described decreasing levels of trust and confidence. All of that combined to create, I believe, problems for people to believe that there was a plan, to believe that we had a level of integration, to believe that we were going to be able to ultimately successfully resolve not just the events here, but in many other jurisdictions.
Thank you. Senator Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Sloley. I'd like to continue on this. Do you think that had you stayed, the events would have resolved themselves as they did?
I can't engage in that conjecture, sir. I'm just glad they ended safely and successfully.
I appreciate that, but I still think there's something that we haven't been able to access yet in your decision making, and that's the relationship that you had with political leadership in this city, and a sense of lack of confidence, I guess, that you had the authority within your own police force to resolve this. Were you concerned that your officers would not follow the orders as prescribed in the plan that you developed?
Not at all, sir.
So if you didn't have the lack of confidence from your officers, and you didn't have the lack of confidence from your political leadership in the municipality, why resign?
Again, you asked me a question, I believe, did I have lack of confidence in my officers following orders? The answer is no. Did we have challenges within the organization, as every other organization did, around coordination, communication, morale? Yes, we did. So it's not a universal, unqualified, I trusted every single person in every single circumstance. No executive has that benefit that I'm aware of. Are you asking whether or not there were expressions of lack of confidence from my board, from city councilors, from MPPs and MPs? I think the record is quite clear. There is certainly newspaper articles and open source social media, and I'm sure you have access to that information, probably greater than I even do at this point.
Were you concerned at all about your the officers that we did see on screen and were quoted as being supportive of the convoy and questioning the actions that the police were taking?
I appreciate the question, sir. I'm only aware of a handful of those. Every complaint that came to me during my time in office was assigned for full investigation. Where there is evidence, I ask for a full prosecution. I don't know the status of those cases. But I can tell you in literally every single major protest that I've been involved in 2 police jurisdictions, there are human beings who are sworn as police officers that have a level of compassion towards the cause, but still rise above their personal feelings and deliver excellent services, even if they may make expressions. I can tell you when we had the Black Lives Matter March in 2021, we spent a lot of our operational planning time before the event to make sure that we could understand compassionately the feelings of our racialized officers and non-racialized officers who were sympathetic to the causes aligned within Black Lives Matter, but could still go out and do their job and do it successfully and safely, and they did so. So this is not a unique situation in policing.
Do you believe that training with respect to the sentiments of the protesters needs to be incorporated in police training as well?
I actually believe it is incorporated, but my recommendations do call for new policing standards, national standards, training that supports that, and inspectorate generals that will make sure that that's audited and the data provided to policymakers and decision makers going forward.
And that's in the table, in the document you're...
Senator Harder, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move to go back to round 1, but I'd like to suspend until 8 o'clock, so we will take a break for 13 minutes. This round will be 5 minutes. We begin with Mr. Motts.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you again for being with us. Chair, were you going to stop my time for a second and ask about the time for the witness?
Do that at the end.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Slowly, you had indicated to some of my colleagues' questions, and I just wanted to clarify. You indicated that you had tow trucks that were available to you. It wasn't safe to deploy them without the Emergencies Act.
Wasn't safe to deploy them in certain areas of the
Yeah,
theater,
but I mean,
particularly the red
so-
zone. We deployed them in other areas.
Right, but the thing is that you had them and they were available to you. You didn't need the Emergencies Act to get them. That's number one. Number two.
Sorry, just to be clear, we did not have sufficient
Fair
tow
enough,
trucks
but
and
you had them.
predictable resources. We
You
had
had them.
We had a
So
small
you
number.
didn't need the Emergencies Act either to access resources. I know they.
No, sorry, sir. We did. We did not have resources on scale for the plans that we had in place.
Right, but you had resources because you started clearing the streets and your plan, because your exact words were you stated that you were planning was in a better place on February 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th and 13th as you started executing the plan. Before the Emergencies Act came in, you had hundreds of additional. In fact, you probably had around 1,500 from what I was told before the Emergencies Act was invoked.
No, that's
But it
not-
was all cleared up before
That's
the
not correct,
Emergencies
sir.
Act
Those
came, was it
numbers
not?
are not correct. The resources you're describing, part of the disinformation, unfortunately, that was flowing around this city were large numbers of resources that we simply did not have and
Okay.
didn't even get to those numbers while I was still in
the
office.
swearing in of individuals can happen, you can put a couple hundred people in a room and you can swear them in all at once. You don't need the Emergencies Act to swear people in. Is that correct?
There are different techniques for swearing
Right.
people in, yes,
Okay.
sir.
So you don't need the Emergencies Act is my point. I want to go back to Mr. Brock's comment, and you didn't answer specifically because his time ran out about the incendiary rhetoric and divisive language used by our Prime Minister. But you've been in law enforcement for 30 years. You've dealt with the odd protest or two, as you've indicated, of course, and we thank you for that. Has it not been your experience that when you have a dedicated and committed protest base, if the person or organization that they're protesting against or they want to be listened to by taunts them or insults them, surely that's more than likely to escalate the agitation and double down on the commitment rather than convincing a protester to walk away?
Again, I can't put myself into the mindset of any group of the demonstrators and protesters that I've dealt with over 30 years. There are different things that triggered people and groups for different reasons.
Human nature being human nature, honey usually is more attractive than other things. Now, I want to take you to some political discourse that may have gone on. Your previous Ottawa Police Services Board Chair, Diane Dean, suggested that Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair might have had an axe to grind with you, leading to the weeks-long federal foot dragging when it came to accessing or answering your requests for additional resources. Do you share that perspective at all? Just yes or no?
No,
Okay. Is there any truth to it at all?
I can't engage in conjecture, sir, sorry.
Okay, but in the day before the Emergencies Act was invoked, Mr. Blair did a television interview, and he said, and I quote, "We all need the police to do their job." Do you believe that you were doing your job, and how do you react to him slamming you like he did?
I know I was doing my job. I can't state what the intent was of the minister's comments there.
But what's your take? I mean, you obviously didn't feel good. If I was in your shoes when the minister said that, I'd become unglued on him because he didn't provide me what I needed. But I appreciate your political correctness. You are. Is there any truth to the suggestion that when he was the Toronto Police Chief, you were the Deputy Chief for the most of the time that he was there? Was there anything going on between the two of you that would prevent him from, from treating you the way you needed to be treated here in a prejudicial way as far as you not getting the resources you wanted?
You said it, sir. I was a deputy chief for a significant tenure of Chief Blair's time, and I was given some of the biggest operational responsibilities during that time.
On the Friday before the Emergencies Act was actually invoked, the Prime Minister said that he did not, and I quote, accept the contention that you had exhausted the resources available to you. Now, Mr. Slowly, the Prime Minister, did he know what he was talking about?
Again,
did you have?
I'm not aware of a statement like that. I can tell you that we exhausted every resource we possibly could put on the field and put our people through more than they humanly should have been put through.
Did you?
Sorry, Mr. March, 5 minutes is up.
Was that on 1.5 time or was that on regular time?
Regular time, sir. Madame Badayan? Oh. Sorry. Oh, go ahead. I apologize.
As we start the clock. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that we have to really bring it down to taking advantage of an opportunity that we have before us, Mr. Sloy. You are an individual that has served for many years with the Toronto Police Force. You came to Ottawa. You run the Ottawa Police Service. And in my books, that tells me that you have a great deal of experience. And when it comes to situations that came up not that long ago, we like to think that we tap the minds of individuals that have the expertise. I would find it very difficult to find someone that's better suited, knowing Ottawa as well as you do, knowing the force as well as you do, given the background that you have. And you're telling this committee today that your primary goal, from what I understand, is to assess the risk and to ensure public safety and the safety of your law enforcement officers. Is that a fair assessment, what I just finished saying?
Public safety, yes, which includes the safety of our police service members. Yes, sir.
You also made it very clear that whether it was the municipality of Ottawa, the province of Ontario, or Ottawa, the government of Canada, invoking the Emergencies Act was beneficial and allowed for the successful displacement of the convoy. Is that a fair assessment?
I described it as a whole of Canada effort, and that includes the declarations of emergency at the 3 levels of government.
So there's no doubt in your mind that having those tools that were given by all 3 levels of government gave a strategic advantage to law enforcement so that they could clear it in the manner in which they did.
I prefer not to use the term law enforcement, but it provided additional tools and capabilities to the police services. I can specifically talk about this police service here up until my last day in office, yes, sir.
And there's no doubt in your mind on that?
They were definitely advantages that came that allowed for a quicker and ultimately safe and successful conclusion to the events here in Ottawa, yes, sir.
Okay. So we make reference, for example, to tow trucks. This legislation, the federal legislation, enabled, whether it was the province of Alberta, that raised concerns. They could not get the tow trucks. I suspect you might have heard some feedback on that, right? Having the legislation there would have given the confidence that you would be able to access the tow trucks. Is that a fair comment?
Again, I can't speak for what took place in Alberta, but I did hear that feedback in my discussions with Commissioner Lucky about what was taking place in Coots and other police leaders, yes.
Sure. When I think of the thing of safety, I was shocked when we found out there's all sorts of weapons in the province of Alberta. I walked down, from all the way down Wellington, from Lisgar and Metcalfe, down Metcalfe, up, and then I would go into West Block or Wellington building. And I pass all these trucks, and I often wonder, what's in the cabs? You hear about these weapons that were found. Was there any discussion in terms of what type of things could be in the trucks, the semi-trucks, the cabs, what might be there?
There were constant discussions around weapons or weapons that could actually be just converted from normal items, including the use of a vehicle. Yes, sir, every single day.
Would it be fair for me to say that that was a legitimate concern that people that were in control, our law enforcement officers, had in the back of their mind that there could be weapons then? Is that fair to say?
No, sir, it wouldn't. While we had a healthy discussion on a daily basis around what we knew from an intelligence basis as to, if you're describing weapons as prohibited weapons,
Yes.
switchblade knives, firearms, as the case may be, we had those discussions. The weapons that we were more concerned about were quite frankly, vehicles and other things that could be converted very quickly into different ways to harm public safety, to affect public safety.
Can you give just a quick oversight in terms of what you believe when you think of the organizers? Because it wasn't one organizer. There's a multitude of different people that were organizing this, the convoy. A lot of them surprised us. Some were former police officers, all sorts of backgrounds. Can you give a thought in terms of how that might have impacted the potential volatility of the convoy itself?
Thank you very much. From my understanding, there were experts from a range of fields, from medical to legal, but certainly the presence of former national security, military, and police members within some of the core coordinating capabilities of the events around the convoys was a significant threat risk factor that we had not seen on that type of scale in my experience. And I've heard from other police chiefs that was a significant factor, yes, sir.
So this situation was, in fact, truly a national security crisis from your perspective, very unique, had all sorts of potential to have weaponry and so forth.
Slowly, maybe you can answer the question. I think you have enough to work with very quickly.
Yes, it was a national security crisis, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fortin, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Slowly. Sorry, I thought it was my mic. You said that the proclamation of the Emergency Measures Act was useful. That's what I understood. And my question is this: was it necessary?
Thank you. To understand the distinction, it was very, very helpful for the time that I was in office and that I could observe as chief of police.
Mais,
I can't speak to whether it was needed.
OK, est-ce que...
Okay. After you left, Wellington Street was cleared. I know a lot of other things happened elsewhere. Let's focus on Ottawa because you were chief of police for Ottawa. I won't get into what happened in Alberta and elsewhere in Ontario, but here in Ottawa, under your jurisdiction, there was the issue of Wellington Street that was blocked. You asked for 1,800 police officers on February 7th. From what I gather, they arrived on around the 12th of February.
Started to arrive over the course of the time that I was in office. The vast majority of them arrived after I left office.
OK, mais il y en est arrivé.
Okay, so some arrived. You said you couldn't have the trucks towed because you were concerned about security issues. You also did not remove the children or vulnerable people. I'm not quite clear on why that was. Again, I would imagine security issues. And then you leave. And then the street is cleared. When they cleared Wellington Street, the police officers, was that in keeping with the plan that you had drawn up when you were there, or was it an entirely different thing?
It was a plan that we had been developing from before the arrival of the convoy events in the city all the way through till my last day in office. There was
Okay.
only ever one plan.
OK, donc,
Okay, so that plan that you had drawn up from the start, that's the plan that was enforced to clear Wellington Street. It worked. I think we can say that. It took 2 or 3 days, and then, yeah, everyone was out. In what way did the Emergency Measures Act, in what way would it have been useful for the execution of this plan of yours?
Again, I can only speak to the days I was in office, probably less than 48 hours while the Federal Emergency Act was in place. But I've, again, referenced previously, I think it was Mr. Harder's questions, the additional capabilities to swear officers in from out of province to be more quickly deployed into the theater, the ability to access more and more consistently, predictably, resources like tow trucks.
ils étaient là, on comprend qu'ils sont...
They were there. We understood they arrived. You said they started arriving prior to your resigning, and then it continued. I'm not sure exactly until what date, but your plan was working. It was underway, and it was working. The additional police officers were there, and that's actually how the street was cleared. I'm having a hard time understanding in what way the Emergency Measures Act was useful. I'm trying to understand. I'm having a hard time understanding why you left. I mean, in keeping with what Senator Carignan was saying, it seemed as though everything you wanted actually happened. And then you could have cleared Wellington Street and said, the job is done. But you left. So that is just bugging me. I'm trying to understand. It just doesn't seem rational to me. You are a rational man, and that is obvious. But perhaps I'm just not grasping all of the details here, and I would like to have a better understanding of what happened. Why would a man like you, with your level of experience, your skills, and this is a difficult situation to manage, but that's an exciting challenge for a man of your stature. And then the plan is happening, it's in place, it's being carried out, and for a reason no one understands, you leave, and somebody else, other than you, manages to bring that to fruition and clear the street. What happened?
I'm trying to parse the question out of that, sir, but
C'est passé la question.
What happened is the question. Why did you leave? Why did you let someone else carry out your plan?
Again, I'll try to restate what I stated earlier. I appreciate your need for clarity. I'll do my best. There are a wide range of reasons why I considered a resignation. And there were a wide range of factors putting pressure on that. But the singular one that I was focused on was public safety, which includes the safety of my members. I've said it before, and I'll say it again to you, sir. Anything that I could do for any second that I held that office to improve the likelihood of safe outcomes for the citizens of the city, including my service members, I was going to do. And that was literally the last thing I could do to push the resources in to fully implement the plan that was ultimately successful.
Merci. Merci, Mr. Slowly.
Mr. Green.
Thank you. And so in carrying on the discussion around pressures leading to the decisions, as a police chief, I'm sure from time to time you would deal with insubordination. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Do you ever have, these things happen at a senior level? Like as you're drafting out a plan, is there a disagreement on style or substance? I know that in the media you talked about an elegant, beautiful plan not being available. Was there ever instances of insubordination within senior decision-making within your service?
Within the weeks of
leading up to the occupation and your time there.
I can tell you there were some incredibly stressful situations at all levels in the organization, and not just within my organization, across the theater that this was taking place in. But yeah, we had some incredibly contentious and challenging moments at all levels of the organization. So there was only one occasion that I would say would even come close to rising to the level of a definition of insubordination. But we were focused on public safety.
Well, I think one of the differences that you talked about, and I'll just use this as a bit of license, when you talk about the paradigm shift and you reference the infiltration of people with significant skill sets in the logistics and supply and planning, you reference counterintelligence, the way that this was situated. In your opinion, would this not go beyond the threshold of being sympathetic to, but actually being ideologically motivated by a cause when you cross that rubric from a sworn officer into civilian illegal occupations?
Sorry, just to be clear, the references to people who were former national security, military, and police, they were former. They
Correct.
were retired, and they were not part of my police service.
Not your service, but they're part of policing.
They're retired members, and they're now private citizens.
Correct. And you would have also witnessed people that were active duty with the fist bumps and some of the exchanges that were happening. There was the authorization, or at least lack of enforcement, on bringing incendiary devices into the precinct. Like when you reference design threat and you talk about canteens of diesel or gasoline or God knows what else, fertilizer, who knows what else, into the precinct, how does that happen? Whose decision is that to allow that to happen?
Again, I'm looking for the question, but I just want to be clear. Design threat is not a term that I'm familiar with. You've used it twice, and I just want to be clear about that. If you're asking about expressions of sympathy, I can tell you that, again, the ability for an officer to de-escalate a situation by a smile, a selfie, or a fist bump, if that achieves a public safety outcome in the moment that he or she, that officer, feels is reasonable given all the concerns, I've seen that applied over my 35 years in policing in a wide variety of circumstances.
I'll be clear with you. I haven't seen it applied in many of the counter protests I've been involved in, but I digress. When we talk about threat assessment, when I talk about design threat, the fact that you have Wellington Street as an alleyway, buildings on one side, a crane set up in the middle of the street with a wrecking ball on it, people coming in with incendiary devices on the footsteps of the PMO's office and Parliament, that's what I talk about in terms of the design threat. The way in which the environment and the use of cars, and you'd reference not traditional illegal weapons, but cars and other things, would you have accounted for the other things, including fuel, gasoline, diesel, fertilizer, and other things?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was getting to with that. So in your assessment of the threat, where would you have placed it at its highest during the time that you were in care and control of the command?
The threat, again, there were literally thousands of threats within the theater that we were dealing with.
how would you assess the overall threat to the nation's capital? Would it be a high level of threat, i.e., to meet the threshold of the Emergency Act, it has to meet the threat to national security under the CSIS Act. Very prescriptive legal definitions of what it would mean, and part of our work is trying to figure out whether it met the threshold. So in your opinion, did it meet that threshold under the CSIS Act?
The entire situation that I saw unfolding across this city and across this country was, in my opinion, a national security crisis.
Meeting the threshold of the national, the Emergency Act measure?
I don't know the definition of it, and I'm not a lawyer, but
Okay.
I'm telling you as a police professional, the entire circumstances that I saw operating across this country was a national security crisis.
Last question. You've been involved at G20 and many other massive operations where lots of officers are coming in. Are you familiar with aid to civil power?
Yes, I am, sir.
And so why was that contemplated, and why wasn't that implemented?
Every single option was on the table. I think I'm publicly quoted saying that on a number of occasions.
Yeah, that's a thing to say publicly, but was the aid to civil power something that you advised we implement, or is that something that you put on the table and then took away?
I have no power to put anything on the table. But
You
I
can't
said-
request aid to civil power?
No, lawfully, I can't request it. But
Who
was I-
would?
Sorry, sir. I'm trying to answer your question. I did not ask anyone specifically to consider aid to civil power. But in all the discussions that took place in the weeks, that was a discussion that was a live and ongoing discussion. But I have no authority as a chief of police in a municipal agency to make that request or make that determination.
Does it come from the mayor?
Mr. Green, your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Green, I'm wondering if you could take over?
Yes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you again, Mr. Slowly, for being here. And I'll just follow up on Mr. Green's question on aid to civil power. Where would that authority come from, and who can make that request? Do you know?
I actually don't know the legislative framework around that would happen. I just know it's not within the legislative framework of a chief of police.
Thank you for that. I wanted to talk a bit about the relationship between you and the province, and I mean in your capacity as the chief, because you mentioned that the provincial order, emergency order, was helpful, and the city order. So in your discussions in terms of getting additional people, I assume you would speak to the Commissioner of the OPP. With respect to the provincial government itself, was there any opportunity for you to speak to get some sort of other types of assistance? And I'm thinking of what, and I don't know the terminology today, what it is, but Emergency Measures Ontario, as you know, used to be part of the Solicitor General's office there. Can you just elaborate on any involvement of the province in terms of your discussions during your time as chief in this incident?
Thank you very much. Very early in the situation, I received direct phone calls from Deputy Minister Mario Di Tommaso from the Solicitor General's office. Later that same day, I actually had a conversation with Solicitor General Jones. As that week unfolded, that first week, there were tri-party calls on almost a daily basis involving City Manager Kanalakis, Deputy Minister Rob Stewart, I hope I don't get his name incorrect, from Public Safety Canada, other deputy ministers from a range of ministries, and frequently on that call, Deputy Minister Di Tommaso would represent the provincial interests. Information was shared, resource requests were made, comparisons around what was happening across the full theatre, provincially and nationally, were discussed. And so there was a regular line of communication between all three levels of government that took place involving the province of Ontario.
As there should be.
As there should be.
Yeah. And can you tell me, because I just recall reading, and this may have been after your time, there was a point when Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge incident, was taking place. In fact, if I'm correct, there were resources from the OPP, particularly, taken from Ottawa to go to the Ambassador Bridge. Was that accurate reporting?
Sorry, I nodded my head in affirmative, but I'm not aware of OPP resources that were stationed here that left to go down to Windsor. I'm not aware of that. I know the OPP had an incredible challenge managing all the resources requests that were coming in. And I want to say publicly the work of Commissioner Carrique of the OPP and his senior staff, I call it air traffic controlling all the competing requests from across this province and across the country, was a fundamental assistance to the ultimate success of what took place in January and February.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Because part of it is for Canadians to understand the complexity and layers of policing in the province of Ontario and across the country. And I think you've done a good job of laying it out, and I thank you for that. Also, when you were asking for additional resources, as opposed to being what we'll call boots on the ground, you would actually need different levels of expertise on a 24-hour basis to support a municipal police service that was becoming exhausted. Would that not be also correct?
Absolutely correct.
Do you know how much overtime your officers did up until the point that you left in overall numbers? We can ask others, but
Yeah, I've seen a number somewhere in the range of 30 to 35 million as a total price tag.
Yeah.
I can't tell you where it was on February 15th.
do you know off the top of your head whether your officers were working a regular hour shift, or were you bringing in officers on overtime on a regular daily basis?
They worked hard.
They did work hard. I fully appreciate that. Because one of the things that I think is most important to understand when you have a long standing incident like that is people wear down over time. And I think would you agree with me that it's important to understand that as you talk about bringing in additional resources? Because what you need is fresh resources to take up and give people a rest.
I don't know if anybody will ever understand how hard those officers and those civilian members worked.
Well, I appreciate that you do, and I thank you for your comments. Senator Carignan, you have 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. Around February 12th, how many police officers did you have?
The time frame that you're looking for, sir?
Entre le 10 et le...
Between the 10th and 12th of February, you had how many resources? Police resources, that is. The RCMP, the City of Ottawa, the OPP, and all.
So this is an approximation. I
Yes.
am aware that there are charts available and are being disclosed by the various agencies around that, including Ottawa Police. But I would say somewhere in the range of 500 to 600 officers in that time frame. But again, that's spread over a 24-hour cycle. So it's not 500 all the time that are available. You'll have to divide that literally by 3 shifts and then apply that across the theater that we were involved in.
La GRC nous...
The RCMP told us that there were about 537 RCMP officers before February 14th. Is that possible?
It is possible because the numbers were significantly ramping up the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But again, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I believe my last day in office, the staffing numbers that I saw the morning of February 15th, put it in the range of 700 to 800 officers that were available in the theater over that 24-hour period. But again, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me.
Mais avant...
Okay, but before then it was about 500. Between the 10th and 12th, that is.
And I believe so, sir. Please, I just don't have the numbers.
Okay.
Okay. The Privy Council sent us documents with an update on the situation and the number of protesters. So on February 10th, according to that, at 8 a.m., and I quote,
Un petit nombre de personnes...
there's a small number of people along Wellington and other streets around it, and vehicles are spread out through the precinct. On the 11th, 0 to 5 people are on Parliament Hill, a small number of people on Wellington and other streets around it. Vehicles are parked in the area. There are 4 tents and a campfire on Wellington. 11th of February in the evening, 11 people on Parliament Hill, a small number on Wellington Street and other nearby streets. On February 12th, 8 a.m., 0 to 5 people on Parliament Hill, a small number of people on Wellington and other nearby streets.
Passé.
What was actually happening? You have 500 police officers that are available to clean things up. You got 8 people, 12 people, 4 tents, and a campfire, and nothing gets done to free up the street. And you've got protesters that told us on the 10th and the 11th of February or that we're saying to some people, no one told me to leave. How can you explain that?
You want me to ask first, sir, the question that you put about the
Allez-y dans
protester
l'ordre ou dans le
statements?
désordre, mais
Either way, I think that's
Statements, so let me focus on the substantive policing question.
Okay.
As I said before, 500 on whatever day that happened to be split over 3 different shifts. That doesn't mean they're all available at the same time, at the different times we talked about. Let me also say that even in those early morning hours where there were low numbers, when officers did try to effect an enforcement action or any other action, many times they were swarmed and sometimes overwhelmed. I can tell you explicitly of one female sergeant that had worked an 18-hour shift and had gone out on her own time to support frontline officers, who herself was almost overwhelmed at one of those 4 o'clock in the morning opportunities that you talked about. That is well documented by other levels of threat assessments, well beyond being authored by the Ottawa Police Service. So feel free to make yourself available of those assessments. The fact is, sir, it was never that simple. We saw it in Coutts, Alberta, where there were substantive resources available, operations well planned, and within minutes of attempts to remove trucks, those forces were overwhelmed. We saw it in Windsor, in other jurisdictions. This is not something unique to Ottawa.
quand la
when, after February 14th, there were more police officers, around 1,500, but there are far, far more protesters then. By not acting at an opportune time when there are fewer protesters, did you not, in a way, increase the risk by announcing other interventions that led to there being an accumulation of far more people, actually increasing the risk?
Sorry, your time is up. I wonder, Mr. Sloly, if you can give a brief reply.
No, sir.
Senator Harder, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and Mr. Sloly. Thank you for your ongoing testimony before us. I know that we appreciate the consideration that you're giving us, and I'm sure that it is not always easy for you. I appreciate that, particularly when you talk about your forces and the pressures that they were under. Earlier, you talked to us about the lack of confidence that you felt from at the time, with lack of action to dismantle the occupation. That frustration was shared by a lot of your citizens here in Ottawa. And I'd like you to elaborate a little bit about the frustration that we as citizens felt when we saw jerry cans of gas being delivered to the convoy, support being expressed from some quarters to the convoy, while at the same time businesses were shuttered. The Rideau Club was Rideau Center was shuttered. The older citizens of Ottawa felt insecure in terms of simply leaving their apartments, let alone getting to work. So that frustration was, I'm sure, something that you both observed and felt was legitimate frustration.
Absolutely, sir. In my opening comments, I spoke to that. Actually, my closing comments of my opening statement, I spoke to that. That was a very real and live situation, and I have great empathy and compassion for the people that approached me during my time in office, expressed their concerns, frustrations, and even stronger language. And I understood that, and we did our best to address that as quickly as we could.
Well, that's what I'm trying to actually get to in my questioning. Could that situation, could we have got to the situation we eventually enjoyed more quickly had the invocation of the Emergencies Act been sooner? My question, as you might know from the transcripts to ministers, was what took you so long? Did you ever feel, as the chief of police here in Ottawa, gosh, I wish help was on its way?
Every day. My priority from the first 24 hours and seeing what arrived in my city was resources. My first indication of the scale of resources that we would need and the specialization of the capabilities of those resources was on February 2nd, when I met with the public order commanders from my own organization, as well as other Ontario organizations. When I put to them, what are we going to need to safely, lawfully end this? The scale at that point was every single public order officer in Ontario and many more from outside of Ontario.
And did you and your fellow leadership from across the province express that need to the political authorities in the jurisdiction that you worked?
It was expressed through the partners that we had, municipally, provincially, and federally. No doubt, as professional as they are, they would have briefed their political channels. But until the official announcement that I made for the 1800, that then went to the chair and the mayor and a signed letter to other two levels of government, we were working through the policing construct. We formally engaged the other two levels of government
in
on
your
the 7th
in your
of February.
11 points that you hopefully will flesh out. Do you make comments and recommendations with respect to a more effective and timely coordination at the political level in circumstances like this?
I've avoided that, sir. But you will see comments around more effective coordination, certainly between police agencies and national security agencies in future events.
And could you elaborate on that? Because as an observer, I think one of the things we saw was a sense of silos and lack of coordination, at least on a timely basis.
I think you've expressed that extremely well, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Final question, Senator Campbell. You're on mute, Senator Campbell.
I have just a short question, and it's that, so while there was reports in the media that there was ongoing negotiations, be it with the mayor or whoever, and I understand when you say that there was no there, that there were numerous people all saying they were in charge. But it struck me at the time that the board of the police board for Ottawa stated that she was not aware of any negotiations that were going on. And my question is that normal in the Ottawa Police Service that the police board would not be aware of the mayor carrying on negotiations? And I'm not commenting whether they're right or wrong. I'm just trying to get my head around how this information is disseminated so that the people who are making decisions are better able to understand what's going on.
If I understood your question, sir, and if not, please recorrect me, but our municipal board is made up of 3 sitting councillors and a 4th designated civilian designated by the mayor. The mayor has the right, first right of refusal to sit on the board and can designate that to another councillor. In this case, Mayor Watson designated that to Councillor King. So there were 3 city councillors who actively participated as board members and actively participated as council members when emergency council meetings were called. So again, I can't speak for who knew and who called who and when and why, but there were 3 elected city councillors on the board during my entire tenure in office, my entire tenure during the events of the convoy.
So again, there is no clear line of communication going on. I understand there's a clear line of communication from you to your officers, but there's no clear line of communication from your political bosses, the mayor and the police board, with regards to any ongoing negotiations.
Again, I can't speak to that, sir. There may have been, there may not have been. I just can't speak to it. Sorry, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much to all members. Mr. Sloley had agreed to come for 2 hours. His 2 hours is up. Mr. Sloley, we would like to thank you very much for coming to committee tonight, and thank you for your candor. And again, I know every committee member would also very much like to thank you for your service both here in Canada and abroad. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to everybody.
We'll just take suspend for 2 minutes. couple of motions, I believe, and maybe we can start with Senator Harder.
Thanks very much, Chair and colleagues. I know that the clerks have distributed a motion I circulated today, and I'd like to move that the committee direct the joint clerks to invite all witnesses found in the suggested panels of the work plan created by committee analysts and distributed to committee members on May 13th, and to coordinate with the joint chairs as to the composition of those panels. And I would move that, and I'd be happy to speak to it, but briefly. My objective is to ensure that we have some greater predictability and line of sight in our committee schedule. And I recognize that that will not necessarily be in the order of the draft that was circulated to us, but governed in some respects by availability and some degree of coordination even with the Commission of Inquiry. And I'd like to give the flexibility to the staff to develop that plan, and where if there are gaps, they can coordinate with the chairs, the co-chairs, so that we can have before us a greater sense of what is the work plan as we work towards the end of this calendar year.
Mr. Motz?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator Harder. I agree with the concept. I would just caution about us getting too far ahead of when you talk about creating a whole panel. I would hope that what you mean by that is we allow the clerks to allow for 4 or 5, potentially even 6 weeks in advance. We do those chunks of time as opposed to try to map out a witness agenda with everybody till the end of our witness list.
Senator Harder.
Anticipate some degree of flexibility, but it may be that a key witness that we would wish to have says, look, I can only appear with you after November 28th. Rather than wait till November 28th to then say, are you ready now? If we could predictably say, okay, let's book you then for November 29th or whatever. So yeah, let's have some give and take in this, but the greater line of sight, the better.
Yeah, I think you are, I'm seeing nodding, I think you are agreeing and certainly thinking that if we could even get through till, say, the end of November and then bring it back much earlier. You know, as somebody who's appeared as witness before committees in my former life, the short notice makes it very difficult for people to be prepared, and I think we owe it to have the best prepared witnesses we can. So I think Mr. Motz and Senator Harder, I think I'm seeing some agreement. Is there any other comments on it? Oh, Ms. Van Duyn.
To clarify, Senator Harder, that we're talking about the panels that are listed in the work plan from pages 2, 3, 4, and 5.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think we need to take a vote. I think I'm seeing nodding around the table in agreement, and I think that helps the clerks then in planning going forward.
In the near term, yes, but I think there's some witnesses that are that appear beyond that we're still going to want to have.
I think that's. I think we're in agreement with that. Okay. Yeah. And I think that we have been working with a couple of witnesses trying to land on dates. So I think what I've heard and what we've agreed is that they were in agreement with the motion and looking to at least late November, and then we can also discuss this as we move along as well. So as long as we are able to have witnesses. Okay, and all right, and we have a second motion, Mr. Fortin. Oh, pardon me. Oh, Mr. Fortin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I sent it. I think Madam Burke had it circulated this afternoon. If anyone's missing this motion, the interpreter does not have it in the booth. The motion's purpose, let me put it this way, I'm a bit concerned about the use of documents. We have to take into consideration the fact that this Rouleau Commission will be initiating its work next week, I believe on the 13th, October 13th. And Justice Rouleau, in theory, is supposed to issue his report in February. I think the order was mentioning the 6th or the 20th of February, regardless. Justice Rouleau will be issuing this report. I feel that our work should speed up. I think we need to follow what's happening at the Rouleau Commission, and perhaps we can use some of the information that arises there, and they could use some of what we're doing so that perhaps we can make better progress. And in a desire to speed up our work, I'm just looking at the documents we've received, and I'm not sure if it's just me or what, but I find it's a bit difficult to find my way around it. In the binder, the digital binder, we have documents that are identified as being, quote, documents. So what are they? And then you have to click on the document to open it up and understand what it is. Of course, we can do that. It's not impossible, but I feel that it just slows us down when we want to refer to those documents. The motion aims to, and I'm of course open to suggestions. I'm not sure who is responsible for the tabling of documents or including them in this digital binder. Who is responsible for identifying them? Is it the clerks or the analysts or someone else? I'm not sure, but I think it would be important for those documents to be correctly identified, which is what I suggest in this motion, that we indicate the organization or the individual producing the document, the date when it is received, the date when it is produced, the type of documents. Is it a letter, an analysis, a summary, a report? And then the number of pages. It could be, letter from the Minister of Justice to the Minister of Public Safety, dated, I don't know, February 15th, 2022. That's fine. And then I look at the binder and I know what I'm looking at. And I'll have the date when the document was produced. That would be, I believe, useful. That's item 1 on my motion. And the second part of my motion is that should extend to organizations that actually produce documents for us. Over the summer, we received documents following the May 31st motion, but we're talking about over 1,000 pages of documents that initially we didn't have page numbers for. I appreciate the clerks that worked on that over the summer, indicating page numbers, et cetera. I think organizations should take care of doing these things. When they produce documents, I think we should ask them to include the same information in their documents. That said, there's also an issue with respect to multiple documents. When I was chair in September on the 22nd or 29th, Madam Burke, our clerk, received a USB key just right when we were starting our work, and she said, don't worry about the documents that are redacted because perhaps we might have an answer on this USB key. But just like you, I can't work with a USB key. It's a bit difficult. So I think the organization, regardless of what department or organization that wants to add any documents in, should make the effort to consolidate these two documents and say, okay, I sent those documents to you in June. I'll send you others in October. We're going to consolidate that, indicate page numbers, and we have a clear document with the right page numbers, and we are all working on the basis of the same references. And then when we say, okay, this witness, this document, this page number said this thing, and then there will be no doubt as to what we're dealing with. I think that would speed our work up, make us more effective in the drafting of our report. And finally, these documents should be made public, I believe. We know journalists are asking for this. All of us have had to answer journalist questions. They're asking, where are the documents? We'd like to see them. I was speaking to Madam Burke this week, and she said it was complicated. There were a number of issues with respect to IT. Listen, I have no skills in that area. I'm not in a position to say what needs to be done to make it work on the committee website. But if that can't be on the website for whatever reason, I think we should be careful to have them on USB keys and have a USB key that would be available to anyone who's asking for it. That is journalists or the public citizens. These are public documents. There's nothing in the documents that were published that we've heard needed to be confidentially stored, and that's the third aspect of my motion. I think we need to take the necessary means to make these documents public, and I don't see why we wouldn't do that. So these are the three things covered in my motion. My motion doesn't mention it, but I also think we need to address the issue of redacted documents. We have documents. Even today, I was looking at the documents we've received in here. This is the Department of Public Safety document. You have these entire pages with massive redactions, and they were talking about hundreds of pages of redaction or redacted documents. What do we do with this? I don't know what is hidden here. I don't know why this information is hidden, and I feel it's unacceptable. I think we need to ask the people who produce these documents to appear before us and explain. Perhaps, I mean, they may have great reasons as to why they're doing that. It's not ill will, but I think we are entitled to an answer as to why these things are blacked out. And then if we think those are good reasons, then we say fine, keep going. And if we get to the conclusion that it makes no sense, we ask for a non-redacted document, and if the organization says no, then we'll follow a process where we'll go to the House and take the measures that are required. We've been discussing this since the spring. It's the month of October. As I said at the beginning, the Rouleau Commissioner is the commission starting next week, and then in February, I mean, we won't even know what's redacted, and it just makes no sense. There you have it.
And as it's written first?
Oui, certainement.
Yeah.
Oui.
Yes, certainly.
So I have a list, pardon me, but I have a list of people who'd like to speak to it. Mr. Motz?
Thank you very much. I understand the reasons why Mr. Fortin would want to do this, and I just two things. One, can the clerks weigh in on this, please? I mean, I get it. I know this is this. It makes sense to do something different than maybe what we're doing, but I would certainly respect your feedback on this. And would this actually delay the documents that we get in a timely manner?
So the documents that we've received are now, as of today, on the website. So I guess that's step one. For the categorizing them, we're still looking into whether that's possible and how to kind of reflect them on the website or in the binder. So we did do we had that table of contents to try and normalize things a bit, I guess. So we're trying. We're looking into it. And
would this delay the ability for documents to come to us? What
No.
Mr. Fortin's proposing?
No.
Okay.
No, we'd send them as soon as is, and then if we needed to rework them, we would do that after you'd received them.
But I think what Mr. Fortin's motion is saying, though, is that he wants the changes done before we get them, if I understand the motion correctly.
You have them.
Pardon me?
Voyons. On les a déjà. Ce que je
We already have them. I'm asking for an index because, table of contents, on the binder, there are documents. The most recent, we have dates for. We have an idea. But the other documents, I was trying to work with them. Like, for instance, the index that was given to us. This table of contents is great, but it doesn't really fit with what's in the binder. What's in the binder, let's say you look for this letter indicated here, it'll say document. Then you have to open it up, and then you say, okay, no, that's not the one I wanted, and then you have to open another one, and it's hard to follow. If we were to identify the document from the start in the electronic binder saying, okay, this is a letter from the minister, this is the report from the public safety department, this is the meeting that was held at Privy Council, notes, and if we knew what it was, it would be much easier to work with all due respect.
Karen Jones to be followed by Ms. Van Duyn.
Have I understood that you said the documents were on the website? Right now? Okay. On the website? On the site. Before our meeting, I was looking on the website. Perhaps I'm not in the right spot. What bugs me a bit more is the redacted documents issue. We just can't wait until the end of our hearings to then get an explanation and see if there's some way to clean things up or open up more information than what we have received. As an example, I use these documents to ask witnesses questions. There might be areas that are blacked out that I could use, but I can't wait until the very end. It's open. The witnesses have all left. I can't work with those documents. So to have a breakdown of the things that are redacted and to be able to lift that those redactions in part or in whole, that would be important to get that done before the end of a witness testimony. It's really preventing us from doing our work. You know, there are probably many questions we could have asked of the witnesses based on the information that was redacted, which we couldn't because of these redactions. It's really hampering us in our work. So.
To Madame Badayan, but I wonder if we can deal with the motion as we have it and then deal with the redacted piece separately, just to keep it separate from the motion. Ms. Van Duyn.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I did want to speak to the motion raised by Mr. Fortin. I fully agree with the motion as drafted. Perhaps I wanted to focus on another issue we're addressing today, which is the issue of redactions. Sure, we've looked at some pieces of paper that are blacked out, and I can show you pages that are not. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages that have been disclosed. I personally find that this is a subject that needs to be addressed, given the fact that it's not in the motion. It could be addressed in another meeting, but I would say right off the bat that I don't see in what way it would be more helpful to have someone here before us to say it is due to public safety or it is due to solicitor-client privilege, that's why it's been redacted. I don't think that gives us any further information. Whoever will testify will not be in a position to tell us substantively what supports that redaction, and so we'll still be here in 2026 if we keep focusing on this issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to voice my support for Monsieur Fortin's comments, particularly his latter comments. What I take from those latter comments is the ability to efficiently navigate this dump of documents. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that it's manageable as is. We are simply scratching the surface with witnesses so far. We have dozens and dozens yet to go, likely requiring further documentation from those witnesses. We all are busy. We all need to use our time wisely and efficiently. So I just briefly spoke with Madam Clerk. It's something that will require some additional resources, but the takeaway from that conversation is it's not an insurmountable task. I just don't want to personally overburden the staff with that issue. If it's doable, I'd like to have a report from Madam Clerk when we return after our break week and see whether or not some efficiencies can be made. Thank you.
Is that, Mr. Fortin, does that work for you in terms of the motion? Because I think what Madam Clerk is saying is she'd take some time to look and see how she could make it work.
Oui, c'est sûr.
It could be fine. And as I was saying at the beginning of my comments, I'm not sure who does this type of work. Would it be the analysts? Would it be the clerks? Would it be somebody else? I agree with what Mr. Brock just said. I wouldn't want to overwhelm anyone, but I'm just saying that if we want to be effective in our work, we have to get to that point, because we have reduced hours now. We were happy to have 4 hours in September when we started. We were even saying it wasn't enough. And here we are with 3 hours at a time and redacted documents and produced in this way. And I don't think we'll get there. I don't think we'll be able to follow with Juge Rouleau's work. I doubt Justice Rouleau would accept these types of things. I think he's going to.
That was actually, you asked who did it, and the clerk from the Senate just advised me it was admin staff in the Senate who did it. And so I think what the clerk is asking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that they get to take a look at it, look what the extent of the work would be, and the report back to us when we return to be able to tell us how it could be accomplished. And I think that's, Mr. Brock, what you were saying. Is that suitable then?
Oui, ça me va, mais si...
Yep, that suits me. If our clerks were to find a solution during that week, please don't hesitate, Don't have to wait until Thursday. Okay.
Madame Bandayan, I understand you have a motion?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think Madam Clerk has a copy of the motion and has shared it with committee members. It's quite simple. I'll read it. Given that we have returned to 1 3-hour meeting per week, that the clerk be directed to schedule 2 panels of witnesses, each for 1.5 hours for all future meetings.
Authorized to grant access to that the clerk of the committee schedule panels of 1.5 hours each. Madam Chair, is essentially the crux of this motion, given that previously we were working under a timeline of 2 meetings per week, and now we are working under a 3-hour meeting schedule to make the most efficient use of our time as members. I would hope that we could agree to having 2 panels per week on Thursday evening, 1.5 hours each.
Mr. Brock.
I would be prepared to support that amendment with the caveat. Sorry? Motion. What did I say? Oh, sorry, motion. It's a long day. With a caveat that depending on the nature of the witness, we want to ensure that some witnesses be the only witness per a 1.5 hour time slot, and not to burden the committee with additional witnesses that would eat up our ability to get a couple of rounds of questions in. Thank you.
So if I can ask the question, so I thought Mr. Brock was going to go to, there might be witnesses that would require more than an hour and a half. So not that we have, the way I understand your motion, Raquel, is that there is, Rachel, there is one witness for every hour and a half, basically what we're talking about, as opposed to more than one witness in an hour and a half. But I think a caveat for me would be we need to have the ability as a committee to say this witness was going to need more than an hour and a half, and we want them for the entire 3-hour period or the entire 2-hour period or whatever that might be. So if we can arrive at some agreement to have an understanding inside the motion that we do that, then I'm fine with it. Just flexibility with it.
Or Madam Chair, another alternative would be to say that, look, you have 3-hour slot. You invite 2 witnesses to be there for the full 3 hours. And then each one makes a 5-minute presentation. You go around, you then take your choice, whichever one you want to ask a question on. So if you want to focus on one one witness for 3 hours, you could do that as a possible alternative. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to say to the clerk, well, book this one, give them 2 hours, give this one 1 hour, or we'll use up that one slot, 3-hour slot. You know what I mean? So then you'll be able to establish your priorities.
Mr. Fortin, then Mr. Brock.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Madam Bandayan's proposal is a good idea. We have to speed up our work, but I'm not sure that it would be effective. With all due respect, we know it takes about an hour to do a round of questioning with one witness, so an hour and a half means we'll be doing, what, a round and a half? And then the second round are 3 minutes. I was kind of wondering about this. I was discussing it with colleagues here. I think perhaps we should get back to 5 minutes because a number of us were frustrated or didn't have time to ask all our questions in the 3-minute turns or rounds. If we adopt this motion as passed, an hour and a half, we're not talking about one witness, we're talking about panels of witnesses in an hour and a half. We'd each have 5 minutes, and then there'd be a half an hour that we'd have to divide. In what way? Each member 2 minutes? And how are we going to manage that if we can't manage 3 minutes? So I think it's interesting, but I'm not sure it's effective or will be. I liked our formula where we had 2 hours on Mondays and 2 hours on Thursday. I think in that span of time, or we would have managed to really cover the subject matter with a panel. I think in an hour and a half, Madam Chair, I think it'll be too tight.
Okay. Mr. Brock, to be followed by Senator Harder and then Ms. Bandayan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to again reiterate that we've made some progress with some committee business. We've approved some motions that empower the clerk to look for efficiencies and some solutions in dealing with the documents. There appears to be a lot of interventions with respect to Ms. Bandayan's most recent motion, and it looks like there's going to be no conclusive resolution to that. So my suggestion is we move to adjourn the meeting.
Not debatable. Okay. Motion is adjourned then? No?
He's moving the adjournment of the meeting, so.
Oh, of the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a vote on the table for the. Do you want to see if there's agreement first?
Is there agreement?
No.
No. Okay.
So I'll call the vote to vote on adjourning the meeting. The Honourable Senator Boniface. L'Honorable Sénatrice Boniface vote no. The Honourable Senator Campbell.
No.
The Honourable Senator, L'Honorable Senator Carignan.
Oui.
And the Honourable Senator Harder.
No.
No. Mr. Lamoureux.
No.
Mr. Varani.
Nope.
Oh, that's that.
Mr. Brock.
We.
Mr. Motts.
Yes.
Monsieur Fortin.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
Wait.
Yeas pour 5, nays contre 6.
Harder.
And I'm not unsympathetic to getting out of here, but I think it's important for us to at least conclude our thoughts on what is on the table about an hour and a half, because we have given direction now to the clerks to start scheduling. It seems to me that unless this committee is resolved to meet to the end of 2023, we're going to have to double up our workload to have 2 panels a night. It may be that will lead us at some point to say, we'd like that person back or explore more in this area. But let's get going with 2 panels a session, see what the clerks are able to schedule. And if there are obvious adjustments we wish to collectively make, we can do so.
And Diane?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to pick up on what Senator Harder had just said, I don't believe that there's anything in my motion that would preclude us from having a discussion on appointed witness to say that the committee, in its wisdom, votes in favor of changing our usual course of business to have somebody for a full 3 hours or other amount of time. And so I think it allows for the flexibility that we need while also ensuring that we get the work done and that we instruct the clerks accordingly, because as the Senator Harder just mentioned, the clerks need to call witnesses and schedule them. And I think scheduling a witness for 1.5 hours is also easier than for a period of 3 hours. I guess I would also, et là j'aimerais parler plus
Now I'd like to speak more directly to Mr. Fortin, just to clarify. For one round, it's 5 minutes of presentation from the witness and 40 minutes of questioning. So really, we're looking at 45 minutes for the first round, which is completely doable in an hour and a half, and then a second round, as we've done we did it in the spring. It worked in the spring. I don't know why this is so shocking, this proposal today. Anyhow, Madam Chair, it's up to you to chair this meeting, but as far as I'm concerned, we could vote on the motion to address Mr. Brock's request to leave.
What I heard with respect to the motion, and correct me if I have heard it wrong, but I'm hearing that we could use this as a guidance, that in terms of getting schedules in place, if we thought there was a witness that we either wanted to recall or wanted to extend the time frame, that we would have that discussion at the time. And so just as a suggestion in trying to get to some sort of finish line on this, would it be something where that you would have be comfortable with the chairs reviewing with the clerks and looking at any particular witnesses, and we could raise that as the time goes, so that we can at least start to slot things out. And so I just put that on the table, and I have Mr. Motz and then Mr. Brani.
Thank you again, Chair. And Rachel, I think we're prepared to support your motion as long as the comments you just finished making can be on the motion. Just exactly as was said, so that there's flexibility with individual witnesses that the committee will decide to have the ability to extend the hour and a half time. And if that's on the motion, it makes total sense. Let's do it.
Okay. I'm seeing agreement. Mr. Vrani, did you?
I don't think I need to speak.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Mr. Fortin, and then we're getting near the end.
No, I mean.
I understand that if we said out of those 3 hours, instead of planning for 2 rounds of an hour and a half each, perhaps with some witnesses, a 1 hour round would be enough. And then we would need 2 hours for another round. That could be an adjustment, workaround. I was somewhat frustrated today, after 3 minutes, and I feel like I wasn't the only one that was having a hard time really getting into the rhythm of things. I think having some flexibility would be useful. Ideally, we would have 2 times 2 hours. That would be ideal. But if we do have to work with 3 hours, perhaps we could have 2 hours with a panel, 1 hour with another panel, or an hour and a half and an hour and a half based on the witnesses we have.
Hearing or seeing around the table is agreement with the motion to the degree that it gives us, expecting that it gives us flexibility to adjust as we need to depending who the witness is. Has everybody agreed to that? And I think everybody's.
I could propose that we add to the motion unless otherwise agreed. I think that would take into account this discussion.
Okay. Always good to have a lawyer in the group. All right. Mr. Vrani?
So I think it hasn't been circulated, but I think it's fairly uncontroversial, particularly among all of the House representatives here, but it's just that the clerk of the committee be authorized to grant access to the committee's digital binder to the offices of the whips of each recognized party. This is a motion that's been passed, I believe, at every single House committee. So if it is it something that we would agree to? I think it's only the senators that this might be something new for, but it's just allows for more efficacious work within the committee setting.
I'm going to write that down.
On est d'accord.
Am I seeing, am I seeing agreement around the table? Yes, we are. That's great. And there are any other matters? I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. It is adjourned.